A medieval moment. The art of cleanliness. Medieval hygiene. In his book, The Medieval Soldier, 15th Century Campaign Life Recreated in Color Photographs, medievalist and reenactor Jerry Embleton writes that, quote, "The idea that medieval people rarely washed and lived in a sea of filth is absurd. There were no doubt many whose only serious encounter with water was at their christening, or if they fell into a river. In certain regions, splashing water on the body was no doubt considered a dangerous eccentricity, but many 15th century towns provided substantial public bathhouses, which argues a widespread demand. The provision of a bath for guests was a recognized feature of hospitality. To keep a relatively clean and sweet was not only healthy and aesthetically pleasing, but helped to keep lice at bay, an important consideration given the number of recipes for repelling them found in contemporary household books. This was also a contributory encouragement to the widespread habit of changing one's linen frequently, with or without an accompanying wash, and of using bed sheets. Because of the difficulty of cleaning woolen blankets and quilts, even the poor, household servants and peasants used sheets on their beds. Records show that Sir John Falstaff's castle at Caister had separate bedrooms for the cook, gardener, porter, and other servants, with feather beds, fustian blanket, 2 sheets, bolster, coverlet, and curtain," unquote. Medieval people, as a rule, did bathe and understood the general health benefits of being clean. Style and cleanliness were important to maintain health, but were also viewed by the upper classes as marks of culture and refinement. Smelling bad was considered a social faux pas, and pleasant odors, whether of body or home, were associated with sanctity. The 6th century Pope St. Gregory the Great prescribed Sunday baths so long as people didn't waste too much time bathing. Viking men in Scandinavia also often bathed once a week. And while not everyone was always able to get a full bath as often as they'd like, washing of the face and hands, typically about 5 times a day, was common amongst all classes of society. Monasteries, and by the 15th century most castles and manor houses, had bath chambers with large portable wooden bathtubs, often canopied to keep away drafts and covered to retain heat. In some castles, the bathrooms were actually built in. At Leeds Castle in England in 1291, there was a chamber 23 feet by 17 feet, lined with stone, which could contain 4 feet of water taken from the lake that surrounded the castle. There was a ledge for accessories, a recess for the bath, and a changing room located right above the bathroom. Some castle bathrooms had piped-in hot and cold water. By 1312, English King Edward III's palace at Westminster had indoor hot and cold running water. A nobleman usually had a servant, his bath attendant, to draw his bath. When the lord traveled, his bathtub and his bathman traveled with him. 13th century English King John bathed on average once every 3 weeks, and his bath attendant was a man named William Aquarius, an appropriate surname. Sponges were imported throughout Europe from the Mediterranean, and soap, there were actually several varieties of soap available, even liquid soaps for washing clothes, was made from olive oil, with 14th century England being a center of soap production. However, the earlier Celts in the British Isles had also made soap. The first English soap makers appeared at the end of the 12th century in Bristol, and by the 14th century a small community of them had grown up in Cheapside in London. On the continent, soap production was centered first in Marseille, later at Genoa, then at Venice. Despite the appearance of the first English soap makers at the end of the 12th century, 12th and 13th century Angevin England was not as plugged into the bathing culture of the Mediterranean as the rest of Europe, though King John probably bathed more frequently than most, as has been stated, once every 3 weeks. Even monks, who as religious were not supposed to unduly worry over concerns of the body, instead being more concerned with their spiritual welfare, were required to bathe at least 3 times a year, Christmas, Easter, and Whitsun, though they could and often did bathe more frequently at the abbot's discretion, and even monks typically washed their hands and face every day and their feet once a week. The stated disdain for bathing, evidenced by 15th century Spanish Queen Isabella of Castile, is often viewed as evidence of the general medieval attitudes towards bathing. In Isabella's case, however, this aversion to bathing was actually a part of her spiritual discipline, as the queen, noted for her extreme piety and even asceticism, wished to emulate the renunciation of the body practiced by Catholic saints and mystics. In his The Middle Ages, Sketches and Fragments, author Thomas J. Shahan writes, quote, "There are many details concerning the popular use of baths in Germany during the Middle Ages. Men bathed several times each day. Some spent the whole day in or about their favorite springs. From the 20th of May to the 9th of June, 1511, Lucas Schrem bathed 127 times, as we may see by his diary." Unquote. One medieval treatise, How the Wise Man Taught His Son, prescribed herbs for a nobleman's bath. Quote, "If your lord wishes to bathe and wash his body clean,
also known
hang
as
sheets
stews.
around the roof,
Fairs
everyone
had
full of
26,
flowers and
one in
sweet
each
green
quarter of
herbs,
the city in
and have 5 or 6
1292.
sponges to sit
There was
over in
actually
the
a
pond,
guild of
and see that you have
bathhouse
one
keepers
big
in Paris,
sponge to
for which
sit upon,
regulations still
and a sheet
exist from
over
the
so
year
that he may bathe
1270.
there for a while.
Social
And have
bathing
a
was
sponge
very
also
popular
for
in
his
these public
feet if there be any to
bathhouses,
spare,
and some people
and
did
always
use
be
these
careful that the
occasions
door
for
is
sexual
shut.
liaisons,
Have a
so
basin
that
full of hot,
STDs were
fresh
often
herbs,
spread
and wash
through
his body
public
with
bathing
soft
orgies.
sponge. Rinse him with
This
fair
problem was
warm rose
compounded
water
by the
and
fact
throw
that
it
in
over
medieval
him.
Europe,
Then
all
let him go to
washing
bed.
of bodies
But
and
see that the
clothing was
bed be
done by
sweet and
women.
nice, and
It was
first
further
put on his
compounded
socks
by
and
the fact
slippers
that
that he may
since
go
it
near the
couldn't be
fire and stand on
eradicated
his foot
and
sheet.
was viewed as a necessary
Wipe him
evil
dry
to
with a
prevent
clean
even
cloth
worse
and take him to
sexual
bed to cure his
sins.
troubles.
Local laws
Unquote.
regulated the oldest profession, prostitution, which included the wearing of special clothing by prostitutes and the plying of their trade in specially designated districts, such as the stews in London. Many city governments actually opened municipal brothels. However, these municipal brothels were routinely inspected for cleanliness, and the women often given routine medical examinations and treatment to prevent STDs. Medieval medical textbooks routinely prescribed medicinal baths as part of treatments. Certain cities even had health spas, such as Liege in what is now Belgium. In Bohemia, Poland, and Germany, public steam baths were very popular, and in Finland, saunas were popular. Medieval Europeans also understood the value of good teeth. Gilbert the Englishman, a 13th century doctor, suggested rubbing teeth with powders made from herbs such as mint or marjoram, although he cautioned against using hot spices which would make teeth rot. He also advised patients, quote, to dry the teeth after eating with a dry linen cloth so that no food sticks to them and there will be no putrid matter among the teeth to make them rotten, unquote. Ladies wore perfume in medieval Europe, and there were style manuals teaching people how to groom and dress themselves to the height of fashion. Much care was taken to neatly trim hair, beards, nails, etc. The Byzantines continued the ancient Roman practice, both men and women, of wearing makeup. Western Europeans also often wore makeup. For example, people wore makeup to add or subtract color from their skin, though the natural look was popular in some areas. The Anglo-Saxons admired orange or rose-colored rouge, while in medieval Italy, women often wore a flesh-colored base concealed by a pinkish cover. The ingredients in medieval cosmetics were rarely pure and often toxic, however, with lead being one common ingredient. Perfumes were used and popular, as we said, not to mask body odor as is commonly thought, but for the scents they created. And remember, in medieval Europe, pleasant odors were associated with sanctity. As trade brought more and more varied spices and perfumes from the East, perfume became even more common, which caused its manufacture to become more common. The development of an alcohol-based perfume in the 14th century created a longer-lasting, more durable product. The idea that medieval people never washed their clothes is as untrue as the idea that they never washed their bodies. Noble households employed laundresses, and in larger towns there were guilds of laundresses. Fullers dyed, stretched, or shrunk fabric, as well as sometimes laundering it. However, doing laundry was considered a woman's job in medieval Europe. In large cities, women washed clothes at public washhouses, while women in smaller towns or villages would wash in rivers or streams. In medieval Spain, legislation required that any bridge out of town be large enough to accommodate 2 women walking abreast with their water jugs. and since men were not expected to be found at places where women washed, only other women were allowed as witnesses in disputes at a river or stream. Outer clothing was not washed after every wear, just as we don't wash a coat or jacket after every wear, but was shaken out to dislodge dust, sometimes accompanied by beating it with a brush or whisk. General clothing was washed more carefully in a tub of heated water. Underclothes were washed more frequently and hung on a pole to dry. Woolen garments with a long nap could be reshorn to expose a fresh new surface, an expensive procedure. Soapwort, also known as bruisewort, dog cloves, fuller's herb, and latherwort, Saponaria officinalis, was an herb used for cleaning cloth and clothing which originally grew in northern Europe. By the end of the 16th century, the use of soapwort had become widespread in England and other realms for laundering, fulling, and also washing dishes. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people didn't just throw their waste into the street, though in some cities such as London, public privies emptied into the river, and of course horses and other animals left their droppings in the streets, which were cleaned up by dung collectors. Medieval people too understood that human waste spread disease, though not exactly how it did so, believing it was via the noxious odors. And again, pleasant odors were equated with sanctity or holiness. Thus, medieval cities and towns typically had ordinances dealing with sanitation and the proper disposal of waste. For example, medieval Londoners were responsible for the upkeep and cleanliness of the street outside their homes. European homes and palaces in most large cities were equipped with enclosed indoor privies which emptied into large underground cesspits which were emptied at regular intervals. This has been a Medieval Moment with Lee Freeman. For information on this and a variety of other medieval topics, check out the book Medieval Speak, a medieval word book by Lee Freeman.